Good morning, everybody. How are you all doing? I hope you all are having a wonderful day, and I apologize. This podcast has kind of been MIA for the last, 4 weeks in a row? That's my bad. I had a lot of stuff going on, and I was not able to just sit down for an hour and just, do a quick old podcast for you guys. Uh, also, that's I also don't remember where we left off in terms of what we were talking about. I think I know, but yeah, because we definitely talked about the cultural differences of RPGs. So I think we're on criticisms. But if we are going over something we've already discussed before, it's a recap for me. If we haven't and this is all new, well, that's perfect. But anyway, so criticisms. Because remember, we're in the role-playing video game genre, and we're going to hopefully dive into some of the subgenres soon. I don't really know, but anyway. So, criticisms. Due to the cultural differences between Western and Japanese variations of role-playing games, both have often been compared and critiqued by those within the video game industry and press. In the late 1980s, when traditional American computer RPGs such as Ultima and Defender of the Crown were ported to consoles, they received mixed reviews from console gamers as they were not perceived by many of the players to be as exciting as the Japanese imports, and lack the arcade and action-adventure elements commonly found in Japanese console RPGs at the time. In the early 1990s, American computer RPGs also began facing criticisms for their plots, where the party sticks together through thick and thin and always act together as a group rather than as individuals, and where NPCs are one-dimensional characters in comparison to the more fantasy novel approach of Squaresoft console RPGs such as Final Fantasy IV. However, in 1994, game designer Sandy Peterson noted that, among computer gamers, there were criticism against console-based console JRPGs being not role-playing at all, due to popular examples such as Secret of Mana and especially The Legend of Zelda, using direct arcade-style action combat systems instead of the abstract turn-based battle systems associated with computer RPGs. In response, he pointed out that not all console RPGs are action-based, pointing to Final Fantasy and Lufia. Another early criticism, dating back to Phantasy Star games in the late 1980s, was for the frequent use of defined player characters, in contrast to the wizardry and gold box games where the player's avatars, such as knights, clerics, or thieves, were blank slates. As Japanese console RPGs became increasingly more dominant in the 1990s, and became known for being more heavily story and character-based, American computer RPGs began to face criticism for having characters devoid of personality or background, due to representing avatars which the player uses to interact with the world. In contrast to Japanese console RPGs, which depicted characters with distinctive personalities, American computer RPGs were thus criticized for lacking more of the traditional role-playing offered by Japanese console RPGs, which instead emphasized character interactions. In response, North American computer RPGs began making a comeback towards the end of the 1990s with interactive choice-filled adventures. In more recent years, several writers have criticized JRPGs as not being true RPGs for heavy usage of scripted cutscenes and dialogue, and a frequent lack of branching outcomes. Japanese RPGs are also often criticized for having relatively simple battle systems in which players are able to win by repetitively mashing buttons. I mean, isn't that kind of true for a lot of games? If you just press the right buttons and mash them, you win. As a result, Japanese-style role-playing games are held in disdain by some Western gamers, leading to the term JRPG being held in the pejorative. Some observers have also speculated that Japanese RPGs are stagnating or declining in both quality and popularity, including remarks by BioWare co-founder Greg Zeszczuk and running director Daniel Erickson that JRPGs are stagnating and that Final Fantasy XIII is not even really an RPG. Criticisms regarding seemingly nebulous justifications by some Japanese designers for newly changed or alternatively newly unchanged features of recent titles calls among some gaming journalists to fix JRPG's problems, as well as claims that some recent titles such as Front Mission Evolved are beginning to attempt and failing to imitate Western titles. In an article for PSM3, Brittany Vincent of RPGFan.com felt that developers have mired the modern JRPG in unoriginality. Citing Square Enix CEO Yoichi Wada, who stated that they are strictly catering to a particular audience. The article noting the difference in game sales between Japan and North America before going on to suggest JRPGs may need to move forward. This criticism has also occurred in the wider media, with an advertisement for Fallout New Vegas, and Japan openly mocked Japanese RPGs' traditional characteristics in favor of its own title. Nick Doer of Joystick noted that Bethesda felt that Japanese RPGs are all the same and too linear, to which he responded, "For the most part, it's true," but noted there are also non-linear Japanese RPGs, such as the Romancing Saga series. Such criticisms have produced responses such as ones by Japanese video game developers Shinji Mikami and Yuji Horii to the effect that JRPGs were never as popular in the West to begin with, and that Western reviewers are biased against turn-based systems. Jeff Fleming of Gamasutra also states that Japanese RPGs on home consoles are generally showing signs of staleness, but notes that handheld consoles such as Nintendo DS have had more original and experimental Japanese RPGs released in recent years. I feel like we've read this before, but we're going to keep going. But that is something I do want to touch upon. Yes, Japanese RPGs have always been less popular here in the West comparative to Japan. Why is that? Well, it probably has more to do with our media and everything, more so than that, as well as the inundation of what we get. So we probably didn't start getting these JRPG imported games for several years. Until we've had several years of our own RPG system, as well as the fact that our movies, our TV shows, they're all a lot more violent. They're a lot more action driven. You know, what we like to see is the ability to, Fallout New Vegas. Get your guns, go explore, go conquer the untamed land. That right there is cowboys. Fallout New Vegas is cowboys, but set in a post-apocalyptic land. Let's be honest here. And you know what? That appeals to Western gamers. But that cowboy field is not the same for, the field over in Japan. And I can't say what Japan has compared to what we have. It's one of those, I don't live there. So I cannot exactly say why it is the way it is. But that just be the way that it is. So, but I still think that I think both sides, both games types have their own merits. Games are good because of what you're put into them. It's not fair to say that a JRPG is stagnant simply because it's a turn-based system. You know? So the battles are set up like this, like X, right? And I will admit, it was a lot more simple, a lot more standard at the very beginning. Where you had, here's your boss, here's your party. The boss will do X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. And then you can just set your party up to sweep it. Right? That was easy. But see, what they can really do is something that, I'll be honest, Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 3 really exemplified good turn-based action. They had bosses at the end of the game that were significantly harder than the rest of the game. It wasn't something where you could just over-level and overpower everything, which, granted, you can do in any game. But it was one of those where the makeup of your team, the abilities your team had, the ability to add statuses to yourself, debuffs to them, buffing yourself, all of that, dealing damage, taking damage, healing the damage. All these factors that you could needed to juggle in order to overcome these obstacles. That's not something you're going to get in a Western style game. Because let's take Final Fantasy VII Remake, for example. In 7 Remake, it is more of a, you control one character, and you've got 2 partners sometimes. 1 to 2. But when you're using that one character, it's set more as an action RPG. You're moving around, you're choosing the magic in real time as everything's going on around you. You can't sit there and be like, okay, this guy is weak to fire. I need to go cast Fira. No, it's more like, that guy's flying over there, but Barrett's taking care of it. Tifa's fighting that person, so I'm going to hit this other guy right here. I can get 3 sword slashes in the time it would take 1 Fira. I can't experiment to see which one would do more. I'm just going to do the 3 hits because it's faster. That's the way those games feel to me now. And it doesn't give me the chance to be like, oh man, I should, I need to heal. Let's quickly, go summon up Aerith. And have her cast, Cura on the party. No, it's more like, well, I guess we're in trouble. Kind of deal, It's hard. They both are RPGs. But you're comparing apples to oranges more so than you're comparing RPG to RPG. Is turn-based less popular? Yes. That's going to be true because the Japanese audience is inherently smaller than the Western audience. And you know what? It's okay to have a smaller audience. Are you selling the games? Are you hitting your sales goals? If you're hitting all the goals, if you're innovating, if you're, giving the people, kind of what they're wanting, giving them, oh man, they want Dragon Quest 34. Well, give us Dragon Quest 34, Did you add some new elements? Graphics updated. Is there good character design? Is there good character interaction? Does it bring me back to play again? Like the Dragon Quest is a great series. I've been playing that since I was 10. Dragon Quest Monsters, mostly. But I can replay those games. Why? Because the characters are good. The stories are good. It's compelling. It's things for me to do. And now let's flip it. Skyrim. Well, I've got Skyrim. Have I ever played Skyrim? No. Am I gonna play Skyrim multiple times? No. Am I gonna play it once? Yeah. I mean, it just, on its own, that game just does not appeal to me in the same way that JRPGs will appeal to me. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know? Let people play what they want, you know? I know a lot of these CEOs of big gaming conglomerates, you know, Obsidian Entertainment, BioWare co-founders, you know, writing directors. You know, it's like you're criticizing things that cut into your profits so that people don't want to go get those games because these people who I really like said that they're bad. And that's really what it is. You know, you've got fanboys. You know, I'm a fanboy of Square Enix. You know, I'm also a fanboy of BioWare. However, I'm not going to listen to them to tell me what I like in a video game. But the problem is, a lot of people who don't know video games may have been like, oh, I like that Mass Effect game. And the creators of Mass Effect, BioWare, they said that Japanese RPG turn-based games are really stagnant and just, you know, don't give the players much chance. So I was gonna look at Dragon Quest XI, Echoes of an Elusive Age, but I don't think I'm going to anymore. It's like, let the people choose what they like. Instead of attacking other people, other game genres, and all of that, you would do better to promote the stuff. You think, oh, you know, there's a subsect of RPG players who really enjoy the turn-based. You know, highlight something in your game that might appeal to those people. You know, be like, hey, you know, tired of that turn-based? Why don't you take a break and enjoy yourself some Fallout New Vegas? It may not wait its turn for you to decide what to do, but at the same time, you can hit them while they're trying to decide what they need to do. You know, highlight what you've got. You know, be like, hey, you ever wanted to talk your way out of a situation that you couldn't do it in a different game? Well, here's your chance. You can be the most charismatic mutant in the world. You know? It's like, it's just, I've never enjoyed advertisement that is based solely on crapping on people. It's just not that good. You know, if your content has to shine by shitting on other people, then your game must be just as shitty, if not worse, than the games you're shitting on. Because you want to know why you're shitting on those games? Because they are good and they're outselling you. You know what? Like I said, every game that releases is not going to be Game of the Year. Every game that releases is not going to suddenly jump to number one. There's like 4 layers. I'll revise that number in a minute. There are several layers that you need to hit when you're releasing games, you know? There's obviously, you need to hit a sales goal. You know, you got to recoup your losses with creating, distributing, publishing, all that. You've got to, as a company, You've got stockholders you've got to pay. You've got a board of directors who, that need to be satisfied that the whole purpose of your company, which is to make money, that's right, it's a company. The entire purpose of a company, it does not matter what company it is to make money. You've got to make money, So it's like, did you recoup your losses? Yes. Did you make profit? Yes. Okay, let's go to the next one. Did you appeal to your fan base? And then finally, is there replayability? It's as simple as that, Do you have all of those things? And I would say most of these games hit all of those, They are successfully... Sorry. They're successfully selling their games. The market, did not sweep it under the rug. JRPGs, American RPGs, action RPGs, turn-based RPGs, they all sell. They all sell well. So let Western RPGs do their own thing. Let Japanese RPGs do their same thing. There will be Western turn-based RPGs. Let them do their thing. There will be Japanese RPGs that are action RPGs. Let them do their thing, Let them grow. Let them change. Let them experiment, Saying Final Fantasy 13 is not even really an RPG. It's a hybrid Japanese and Western RPG. And obviously they're shifting away from the turn-based because they want to sell more. And let them do that, Dragon Quest has stuck with the exact same style, but refined it. And I think it plays very well, because I can pick up Dragon Quest 1 or Dragon Quest 11, and I know how to play the game. It's no problem. So, I don't know. Sorry for that small, 20-minute rant. But I feel strongly about that. Mostly because Japanese RPGs are probably my favorite genre. Moving right along. Western RPGs have also received criticism in recent years. They remain less popular in Japan, where, until recently, Western games in general had a negative reputation. In Japan, where the vast majority of early console role-playing video games originate, Western RPGs remain largely unknown. The developer, Matomu Toriyama, criticized Western RPGs, stating that they dump you in a big open world and let you do whatever you like, which makes it difficult to tell a compelling story. Hironobu Sakaguchi noted that users like to categorize Western RPGs as a sort of different style born from first-person shooters. In recent years, some have also criticized Western RPGs for becoming less RPG-like, instead with further emphasis on action. Christian Nutt of GameSpy states that, in contrast to Japanese RPGs, Western RPGs' greater control over the development and customization of playable characters have come at the expense of plot and gameplay, resulting in what he felt like was generic dialogue, lack of character development with a narrative, and weaker battle systems. He also states that Western RPGs tend to focus more on the underlying rules governing the battle system rather than on the experience itself. Tom Beatty of Edge magazine noted that the problems often cited against Japanese RPGs, which were mentioned above, also often apply to many Western RPGs, as well as games outside of the RPG genre. BioWare games have been criticized for lack of innovation, repetitive structure, and lack of real choice. Western RPGs, such as Bethesda games, have also been criticized for lacking in narrative strength or mechanical intricacy due to the open-ended sandbox structure of their game. Despite their criticisms leveled at both variations, Rowan Kaiser of Joystick argued that many of the often mentioned Differences between Eastern and Western games are stereotypes that are generally not true, noting various similarities between several Western styles, such as Lands of Lore, Battle of Krondor, and Dragon Age, and several classic Eastern titles, such as Final Fantasy and Phantasy Star, noting that both these Western and Japanese titles share a similar emphasis in linear storytelling, predefined characters, and bright-colored graphics. The developer Hironobu Sakaguchi also noted there are many games from both that don't fit such categories, such as his own Chrono Trigger, as well as the Mana games, noting that there have been many other such Japanese role-playing games that have never been released in Western markets. And that's exactly what I was trying to say earlier. Both sides have the same problems. It's just you highlight your market and you ignore your own problems. Instead of doing that, learn. Hey, what was super popular in the Dragon Quest? What did people really want from that? What is missing from my game? Do that. That's how you make good games. You learn, you adapt, you upgrade, you innovate. And for God's sake, stop with the open world. That's my personal preference, though. I don't really like open world because I like a structure. Like, Final Fantasy 13 was a good example of an open world. So it was linear up to a point. Then the game was just like, okay, here you go. You have a choice. You can get some lore. You can fight some super bosses. You can get experience and items and things to, go do all these side quests. Or you can progress forward in the story. It was a choice. 100% a choice. Nothing wrong with that. But, yeah. And controversy. In what is viewed as the largely secular nature of Japanese culture has resulted in heavy usage of themes, symbols, and characters taken from a variety of religions, including Christianity and Japanese Shinto. This tends to be problematic when JRPGs are exported to Western countries where the topics of religion and blasphemy remain sensitive, such as the United States. It is not unusual for a JRPG to exhibit elements that would be controversial in the West, such as Xenogears or Final Fantasy Tactics, which feature antagonists that bear similarities to the Abrahamic God and the Catholic Church, respectively. And Nintendo has made efforts in the past to remove references such as these prior to introducing the games into the North American market. So let's dive into a slightly bigger review of the different subgenres. So this one has a couple of blurbs, but we'll still obviously, read into some of these. Like, we're going to go deeper into each of these, but we're going to just briefly touch upon each of them. So, action RPGs. Typically, action RPGs feature each player directly controlling a single character in real time, and feature a strong focus on combat and action with plot and character interaction kept to a minimum. Early action RPGs tended to follow the template set by 1980s Nihon Falcon titles such as the Dragon Slayer and YS series, which feature hack and slash combat, where the player character's movements and actions are controlled directly, using a keyboard or game controller rather than using menus. This formula was refined by action-adventure game The Legend of Zelda, which set the template used by many subsequent action RPGs, including innovations such as open-world, non-linear gameplay, battery backup saving, and an attack button that animates a sword swing or projectile attack on screen. The game was largely responsible for the surge of action-oriented RPGs released since the late 1980s, both in Japan and North America. The Legend of Zelda series would continue to exert an influence on the transition of both console and computer RPGs from stat-heavy, turn-based combat towards real-time action combat in the following decades. A different variation of the action RPG formula was popularized by Diablo, where the majority of commands, such as moving and attacking, are executed using mouse clicks rather than via menus, though learned spells can also be assigned to hotkeys. In many action RPGs, non-playable characters serve only one purpose, be it to buy or sell items or upgrade the player's abilities or issue them with combat-centric quests. Excuse me. Problems players face also often have an action-based solution, such as breaking a wooden door open with an axe, rather than finding the key needed to unlock it, though some games place greater emphasis on character attributes such as lockpicking skill and puzzle solving. I miss games where if you can't lockpick, you could just, kick your way in. They needed to do that again. One common challenge in developing action RPGs is including content beyond that of killing enemies. With the sheer number of items, locations, and monsters found in many such games, it can be difficult to create the needed depth to offer players a unique experience tailored to his or her beliefs, choices, or actions. This is doubly true if a game makes use of randomization, as is common. One notable example of a game which went beyond this is Deus Ex in 2000, which offered multiple solutions to problems using intricately layered story options and individually constructed environments. Instead of simply bashing their way through the level, players were challenged to act in character by choosing dialogue options appropriately and by using the surrounding environment intelligently. This produced an experience that was unique and tailored to each situation, as opposed to one that repeated itself endlessly. At one time, action RPGs were much more common on consoles than on computers. Though there had been attempts at creating action-oriented computer RPGs during the late 1980s and early 1990s, often in the vein of Zelda, very few saw any success, with the 1992 game Ultima 7 being one of the more successful exceptions in North America. On the PC, Diablo's effect on the market was significant. It had many imitators, and its style of combat went on to be used by many games that came after. For many years afterwards, games that closely mimicked the Diablo formula were referred to as Diablo clones. 3 of the 4 titles in the series were still sold together as part of the Diablo Battle Chest over a decade after Diablo's release. Other examples of action RPGs for the PC include Dungeon Siege, Sacred, Torchlight, and Hellgate London, the last of which was developed by a team headed by former Blizzard employees, some of whom had participated in the creation of the Diablo series. Like Diablo and Rogue before it, Torchlight and Hellgate London made use of procedural generation to generate game levels. Also included within this subgenre are role-playing shooters. Oh, excuse me. These are games that incorporate elements of role-playing games and shooter games, including first and third person. Recent examples include the Mass Effect series, Borderlands 2, and The Third Birthday. I've never heard of that. I'm going to have to look into that. Oh, it's Square Enix? Huh, interesting. PSP. Blech. First-person party-based RPGs. This subgenre consists of RPGs where the player leads a party of adventurers in first-person perspective, typically through a dungeon or a labyrinth in a grid-based environment. Examples include the aforementioned Wizardry, Might and Magic, and Bard's Tale series, as well as the Etrian Odyssey and Eliminage series. Games of this type are simply called blobbers, since the player moves the entire party around the playing field as a single unit or blob. Most blobbers are turn-based, but some titles, such as the Dungeon Master, Legend of Grimrock, and Eye of the Beholder series, are played in real time. Early games in this genre lacked an auto-map feature, forcing players to draw their own maps in order to keep track of their progress. Environmental and spatial puzzles are common, meaning the player may need to, for instance, move a stone in one part of the level in order to open a gate in another part of the level. So, first-person, party-based, that's all we have on it. There's not a separate thing for it, so that's why I'm doing these. Some of these don't necessarily have their own thing. So, MMORPG, or the MUD. Though many of the original RPGs for the Plato mainframe system in the late 1970s also supported multiple simultaneous players, the popularity of multiplayer modes in mainstream RPGs did not begin to rise sharply until the early to mid 1990s. For instance, Secret of Mana, 1993, an early action role-playing game by Square, was one of the first commercial RPGs to feature cooperative multiplayer gameplay, offering 2-player and 3-player action once the main character had acquired his party members. Later, Diablo would combine CRPG and action game elements with an internet multiplayer mode that allowed up to 4 players to enter the same world and fight monsters, trade items, or fight against each other. Also during this time period, the MUD genre that had been spawned by MUD 1 in 1978 was undergoing a tremendous expansion phase due to the release and spread of the LP MUD and the Deku MUD. Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Soon, driven by the mainstream adoption of the internet, these parallel trends merged in the popularization of graphical MUDs, which would soon become known as massively multiplayer online role-player games, or MMORPG. Beginning with games like Mediterranean 59, Nexus: The Kingdom of the Winds, Ultima Online, Lineage, and EverQuest, and leading to more modern phenomena such as RuneScape, Ragnarok Online, Final Fantasy XI, EVE Online, Disney's Toontown Online, World of Warcraft, and of course, Final Fantasy XIV. Although superficially similar to single-player RPGs, MMORPGs lend their appeal more to the socializing influences of being online with hundreds or even thousands of other players at a time, and trace their origins more from MUDs than from CRPGs like Ultima and Wizardry. Rather than focusing on the old-school considerations of memorizing huge numbers of stats and esoterica and battling it out in complex tactical environments, players instead spend much of their time forming and maintaining guilds and clans. The distinction between CRPGs and MMORPGs and MUDs can as a result be very sharp, likenable to the difference between attending a Renaissance fair and reading a good fantasy novel. Okay, what does MUD stand for? Multi-user dimension. That is a MUD. And CRPG is a computer RPG. Further, MMORPGs have been criticized for diluting the epic feeling of single-player RPGs and related media among thousands of concurrent adventurers. Stated simply, every player wants to be the hero, slay the monster, rescue the princess, or obtain the magic sword. But when there are thousands of players all playing the same game, clearly not everyone can be the hero. This problem became obvious to some in the game EverQuest, where groups of players would compete and sometimes harass each other in order to get monsters in the same dungeon to drop valuable items, leading to several undesirable behaviors such as kill stealing, spawn camping, and ninja looting. In response, developers began turning to instance dungeons as a means of reducing competition over limited resources, as well as preserving the gaming experience. Though this mechanic has its own detractors. So, instance dungeons. It's a special area that generates a new copy of the location for every group or for a certain number of players that enters the area. So basically, I can be in the same dungeon as you, but we have 2 different copies of the same dungeon. That way, I can't steal your loot and vice versa. Yeah. Lastly, there exist markets such as Korea and China that, while saturated with MMORPGs, have so far proved relatively unreceptive to single-player RPGs. For instance, internet-connected personal computers are relatively common in Korea when compared to other regions, particularly in the numerous PC bangs scattered around the country, where patrons are able to play multiplayer video games, possibly due to historical bans on Japanese imports, as well as a culture that traditionally sees video games as frivolous toys and computers as educational. As a result, some have wondered whether the standalone single-player RPG is still viably commercial, especially on the personal computer, when there are competing pressures such as big-name publishers' marketing needs, video game piracy, a change in culture, and the competitive price point to processing power ratio, at least initially, of modern console games or systems. So yeah, let's see, what do we got? 5 more. Yeah, we got time. So roguelikes and roguelike-likes. A roguelike is a subgenre of role-playing video game characterized by the procedural generation of game levels, turn-based gameplay, tile-based graphics, permanent death of the player character, and typically based on a high fantasy narrative setting. Roguelikes descend from the 1980 game Rogue, particularly mirroring Rogue's character or sprite-based graphics. These games were popularized among college students and computer programmers of the 1980s and 1990s, leading to a large number of variants by adhering to these common gameplay elements. Some of the more well-known variants include Hack, NetHack, Ancient Domains of Mystery, Moria, Angband, and Tales of the Magi. The Japanese series of mystery dungeon games by Chunsoft, inspired by roguelike, also fall within the concept of roguelike games. More recently, with more powerful home computers and gaming systems, new variations of roguelikes incorporating other gameplay genres, thematic elements, and graphical styles have become popular. Typically retaining the notion of procedural generation, these titles are sometimes labeled as roguelike-like, or roguelite, or procedural death labyrinth, to reflect the variation from titles which mimic the gameplay of traditional roguelikes more faithfully. Other games like Diablo and Unreal World took inspiration from roguelikes. I wish I had more to know what exactly they're considering a roguelike-like, but whatever. Sandbox RPG. Sandbox RPGs, or open-world RPGs, allow the player a great amount of freedom, and usually feature a more open, free-roaming world, meaning the player is not confined to a single path, restricted by rocks or fences. Sandbox RPGs possess similarities to other sandbox games, such as the Grand Theft Auto series, with a large number of interactable NPCs, large amount of content, and typically some of the largest worlds to explore and longest playtimes of all RPGs, due to an impressive amount of secondary content not critical to the game's main storyline. Sandbox RPGs often attempt to emulate the entire region of their setting. Popular examples of this subgenre include the Dragon Slayer series, the early Dragon Quest games, The Legend of Zelda, Wasteland, the Saga and Mana series, System Shock 2, Deus Ex, the Elder Scrolls and Fallout series, Fable, Gothic, Xenoblade, and the Souls series. Okay, now let's talk about this in comparison, because I was complaining about, open worlds and not. I can't talk about Dragon Slayer. Let's talk about Dragon Quest. So early Dragon Quest, you were basically dumped onto the map and said, hey, go kill the evil dragon. Rescue the princess, kill the dragon. That was Dragon Quest 1. And then you had to go explore. You had to level up. You had to go find companions and then find your way to the boss's lair. Yada, 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 yada. Dragon Quest 1. Not that bad. In my opinion, it still lacks the direction that I want in a game. So not my style. Now let's jump to Dragon Quest 11. We currently have a ship where we are in Dragon Quest 11. We can go wherever we want. Well, not yet, but we haven't gotten there in the game yet. I know what happens, but, whatever. But right now, I'm going other places than where I have to actually go. I know where I need to go, because the game explicitly tells me, go here. We're exploring. Why? Because exploring is fun. There's a difference between an open world where I don't know where I'm going and I just have a general quest indication of go find this versus, hey, you need to go over there. But you can also go there. You know, you can go so many other places. I like that more. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is the best example of an open world sandbox RPG. Love it, you know. You've got multiple choices. You can go to the 4 divine beasts. You can explore and find all the shrines. You can go explore, find all the Koroks and then their poop. Yes, the Korok seeds are their poop. You can find better equipment. You can ignore all of that and rush straight to Ganon from the get-go. Beat the game in 30 minutes. You know, it's just... you can do whatever you want. And that's what I like about it. But it's not so open that I don't know where to go. Deus Ex, you know, also has that whole... it's open. That one gets a little bit more towards the whole, you know... it's super open, but it's really closed in. It tells you where you need to go, but at the same time, it doesn't. And then Elder Scrolls Fallout, kind of getting that same vibe where it just... I don't know. Maybe it's because I just don't like Western RPGs that I have more of an issue with, like, the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout series. Fable wasn't bad, in my opinion. The Souls games, I mean... it is open world. You know, it's open boss season. They do not tell you where to go at all. I liked it. Is it replayable? Sometimes. I do get bored with it, though. Like, I'll be like, oh, man, I really want to play Dark Souls. And then I start playing, and I'm just like, I don't really want to keep playing Dark Souls. But it happens, you know. It's every game's going to appeal to a different person in a different way, and that's okay. That's the way I'm going to keep viewing it. Anyway, moving on. Tactical RPGs. This subgenre of turn-based role-playing games principally refers to games which incorporate elements from strategy games. It's an alternative to traditional role-playing game systems. Tactical RPGs are descendants of traditional strategy games, such as chess, and tabletop role-playing and strategic war games, such as Chainmail, which were mainly tactical in their original form. The format of a tactical CRPG is also like a traditional RPG in its appearance, pacing, and rule structure. Like standard RPGs, the player controls a finite party and battles a similar number of enemies, and like other RPGs, death is usually temporary, albeit some have permanent death of party members, but this genre incorporates strategic gameplay such as tactical movement on an isometric grid. Tactical RPGs tend to not feature multiplayer play. A number of early Western role-playing video games used a highly tactical form of combat. Including parts of the Ultima series, which introduced party-based tiled combat in Ultima 3 Exodus. Ultima 3 would go on to be ported to many other platforms and influence the development of later titles. Oh my god, these hiccups. As would Bokosuka Wars. Oh god. Considered a pioneer in the strategy simulation RPG genre according to Nintendo. Coincidentally, however, the term tactical RPG, known as simulation RPG in Japan, refers to the distinct subgenre that was born in Japan, as the early origins of tactical RPGs are difficult to trace from the American side of the Pacific, where much of the early RPG genre developed. Many tactical RPGs can be both extremely time-consuming and extremely difficult. Hence, the appeal of most tactical RPGs is to the hardcore, not casual computer and video game player. Traditionally, tactical RPGs have been quite popular in Japan and have not enjoyed the same degree of success in North America and elsewhere. However, the audience of Japanese tactical RPGs has grown substantially since the mid 90s, with PS1 and PS2 titles such as Final Fantasy Tactics, Suikoden Tactics, Vanguard Bandits, and Disgaea, enjoying a surprising measure of popularity, as well as handheld war games like Fire Emblem. Final Fantasy Tactics for the PS1 is often considered the breakthrough title outside of Japan. Older TRPGs are also being released via software emulation, such as the Wii Virtual Console, and on handheld game consoles, giving games a new lease on life and exposure to new audiences. Japanese video games such as these are a result no longer nearly as rare a commodity in North America as they were in the 1990s. Western video games have utilized similar mechanics for years, as well, and were largely defined by XCOM UFO defense, in much the same way Eastern video games were by Fire Emblem. Titles such as XCOM have generally allowed greater freedom of movement when interacting with the surrounding environment than their Eastern counterparts. Other similar examples include the Jagged Alliance and Silent Storm series. According to a few developers, it became increasingly difficult during the 2000s to develop games of this type for the PC. In the West, though, In the West, though several had already been developed in Eastern Europe with mixed results. And even some Japanese console RPG developers began to complain about a bias against turn-based systems. Reasons cited include Western publishers' focus on developing real-time and action-oriented games instead. Lastly, there are a number of full-fledged CRPGs which can be described as having tactical combat. Examples from the classic era of CRPGs include the aforementioned Ultima series, SSI's Wizard's Crown, and the Eternal Dagger. The gold box games of the late 80s and early 90s, many of which were later ported to Japanese video game systems, and the Realms of Arcania series, based on the German The Dark Eye pen and paper system. More examples include Wasteland 2, Shadowrun Dragonfall, and Divinity Original Sin, all released in 2014. Partially due to the release of these games in 2014, has been called the first year of the CRPG Renaissance. Hybrid genres. Finally, a steadily increasing number of other non-RPG video games have adopted aspects traditionally seen in RPGs, such as experience point systems, equipment management, and choices in dialogue as developers push to fill the demand for role-playing elements in non-RPGs. The blending of these elements with a number of different game engines and gameplay styles have created a myriad of hybrid game categories formed by mixing popular gameplay elements featured in other genres such as first-person shooters, platformers, and turn-based and real-time strategy games. Examples include first-person shooters such as Deus Ex and Stalker series, real-time strategy such as Spellforce, The Order of Dawn, and Warhammer 40,000, Dawn of War 2, puzzle video games such as Castlevania Puzzle and Puzzle Quest, Challenge of the Warlords, and turn-based strategy games like the Steel Panther series, which combine tactical military combat with RPG-derived unit advancement. As a group, hybrid games have both been praised and criticized, being referred to by one critic as the poor man's RPG for omitting the dialogue choices and story-driven character development of major AAA titles, and by another critic as promising for shredding the conventions of more established franchises in an attempt to innovate. And that is something I will never complain about. Publishers innovating. You may fail, like the Wii, but you tried. You learned. And because they tried with the Wii, we got a Switch. I mean, people don't like the Switch as well, but I don't know. People are trying, and that's really what I want to see, you know? I'd rather you try and fail, because that to me shows that you want to grow. That's why Final Fantasy is so interesting. Final Fantasy 3, true turn-based RPG. Final Fantasy 4, the introduction of the ATB system. Final Fantasy 5, further refinement of the ATB system and the introduction of multiple classes. Final Fantasy 6, got rid of the multiple classes, back to a multitude of parties, but introduced a different magic system. Final Fantasy 7. Again, no class system, but different way of using magic. Final Fantasy 8. Junctioning. Final Fantasy 9. Learning abilities from equipment. Final Fantasy 10. Titus's attempt at laughing. Final Fantasy 11, the first MMORPG. Final Fantasy 12, kind of an hybrid ARPG ATB system. Final Fantasy 13, bigger shift towards ARPG. And kind of the last time you see the ATB system. Final Fantasy 14, a better MMORPG version. Final Fantasy 15, removal of the ATB system and, more action-oriented combat. Final Fantasy 7 Remake, they're innovating, they're changing. Some things stick, some things don't. Something they just want to, keep it fresh. Where does my heart lie? I mean, my heart definitely lies with Final Fantasies 3, 5, 6, 7, and 8. But really 3, 5, 6, and 7. Like, those are my top. But you know what? That's okay. Stick to what you like. And the last thing we're going to cover today, which is the relationship to other genres. RPGs seldom test a player's physical skill. Combat is typically a tactical challenge rather than a physical one, and games involve other non-action gameplay such as dialogue, choices, inventory management, or buying and selling items. Although RPGs share combat rules with war games, RPGs are often about a small group of individual characters. War games tend to have large groups of identical units, as well as non-humanoid units such as tanks and airplanes. Role-playing games do not normally allow the player to produce more units. However, the Heroes of Might and Magic series crosses these genres by combining individual heroes with large numbers of troops in large battles. RPGs rival adventure games in terms of their rich storylines, in contrast to genres that do not rely upon storytelling, such as sports games or puzzle games. Both genres also feature highly detailed character and a great deal of exploration. However, adventure games usually have a well-defined character, whereas while RPGs may do so, many allow the player to design their characters. Adventure games usually focus on one character, whereas RPGs often feature an entire party. RPGs also feature a combat system, which adventure games usually lack. Whereas both adventure games and RPGs may focus on the personal or psychological growth of characters, RPGs tend to emphasize a complex eternal economy, where characters are defined by increasing numerical attributes. Gameplay elements strongly associated with this genre, such as statistical character development, have been widely adapted to other video game genres. For example, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, an action-adventure game, uses resource statistics, abbreviated as stats, to define a wide range of attributes, including stamina, weapon proficiency, driving, lung capacity, and muscle tone, and uses numerous cutscenes and quests to advance the story. Warcraft 3, Reign of Chaos, a real-time strategy game, features heroes that can complete quests, obtain new equipment, and learn new abilities as they advance in level. Multiplayer online battle arena (MOBA) genre, which is heavily inspired by Warcraft 3's mod Defense of the Ancients (Dota), is a fusion of role-playing games, real-time strategy games, and action games with RPG elements built into its core gameplay. A key features such as control over one character in a party, growth and power over the course of the match, learning new thematic abilities, using the use of mana, leveling, and accumulation of experience points, equipment and inventory management, completing quests, and fighting with the stationary boss monsters have resemblance with role-playing games. According to Satoru Iwata, former president of Nintendo, turn-based RPGs have been unfairly criticized as being outdated, and action RPGs can frustrate players who are unable to keep up with the battles. According to Yuji Horii, creator of the popular Dragon Quest series, and Ryutaro Ichimaru, producer of Square Enix, turn-based RPGs allow the player to make decisions without feeling rushed or worry about real-life distractions. And there's good points everywhere, and, people need to chill. But anyway, we finally have finished our overview of the role-playing game. Starting next week, we're going to be jumping in to the individual subgenres. So we've got the action role-playing subgenre to dive deeper into. We've got the MUD and the massively multiplayer online role-playing game. So we're going to look at both because MUD's helped create the MMORPG. We've got roguelike to dive deeper into. We've got tactical role-playing to dive into. Open world. And, nope, we don't have anything here. Darn. Yeah, I was really hoping for a page on Monster Tamers. There's not. But I'll give it a small little taste at the very end. But yeah, that is gonna be it for us this week. I look forward to continuing to do this next week. Hopefully nothing comes up. But yeah. Thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. And until the next time, everybody, stay funky, people.